So we are now officially launching this event. Excellencies, dear colleagues, good morning to who is with us here at the International Environment House in Geneva, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who is now watching the video of this event. The Geneva Environment Network and the Secretariat of the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species and Wild Fauna and Flora have the pleasure to welcome you today for a briefing on the preparation of the upcoming 77th meeting of the Standing Committee of the Convention, which will be held in Geneva next month. This session will be chaired by the Secretary General of the CITES Secretariat, Ms. Yvonne Higuero. And before I give her the floor, let me remind everybody that the slides that will be presented, the documents that will be mentioned, as well as a summary of the event and the recording of this event will be made available on the webpage of this event, which link is always available on the screen. And I keep reminding that because this is a question we get very often. And with that, Ms. Higuero, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Diana, and welcome to everyone this morning. This cooler morning, the weather has changed considerably, and so I'm very glad that you were able to get out and come over and visit us. I know that many are online, also listening to this briefing, so greetings to you too. I wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much to the Geneva Environment Network, Diana Rizzolio and her great team for always welcoming us to be able to do these briefings here in the MIE2, and also to the government of Switzerland that funds the Geneva Environment Network to be able to have these opportunities to inform the missions here in Geneva about the work that we're doing internationally especially under CITES in this case, and to give you a little bit of information on especially for those meetings that are going to be held here in Geneva, that you can get back to your capitals, but also that you can take part in those meetings that take place. Normally the Standing Committee meeting and the Animals and Plants Committee meetings are generally held here in Geneva. So what we were going to be talking about today is the 77th meeting of the Standing Committee of the Convention, and it will be held in early November. My colleague Sophie Flensberger, who's here next to me, will be giving you some information on that, but maybe for some general information, just to say that it has been a very busy past few months since we had the Conference of the Parties, the 19th Conference of the Parties that was held in November in Panama City, Panama. We had to implement our program of work, hit the ground running, to be able to have enough work done, to be able to report back on that work now that we're having this Standing Committee meeting in November. Okay, yes, please turn your phones off. Thanks. And so my staff has been working very hard to be able to implement the program of work, to carry out these technical assistance, visits to countries, to parties, to be able to hold the technical trainings, both online and in country at the host countries, to be able to further progress the program of work. So a lot has been done, as you will see from the documents that are online. And really, my deepest gratitude to all of those in the CITES Secretariat who have been working very hard, not only to implement the program of work, but on these documents, which are really hard work and require a lot of time. So I hope that they will be to your satisfaction. Just to note the agenda, we always say this, we have a huge agenda. At every meeting we talk about this. It keeps growing and growing. This time I see 77 items on the agenda that will have to be discussed during this week in early November, starting on the 6th of November, the meeting. And so you will not only, of course, it's us who write the documents, but it's of course you who also have to review these documents to be well prepared for the meeting. So I know you're very busy, and those of you who have delegates coming from capitals are very busy working on this. A little bit in terms of what we have for participation in the meeting in November, and it's something that's actually larger than we have ever had in terms of participants. At this point, we have 582 who have registered, participants who have registered from 84 parties. That's 363 people coming from 84 parties of the convention and 219 persons coming from 100 observer organizations. So it's quite a large crowd. And hopefully, I think it's going to be a little bit tight at the CICG with this big group, but we really are impressed and welcoming that we are now, again, after so long that we had been in sort of on standby, still working, but not being able to do a lot on the ground because of the pandemic, that now we're moving on and having a lot of work being carried out. Just to give you some highlights that my colleagues will be talking about in their presentations. As you know, there's been working groups acting between that since the end of the COP in Panama in November. There's been working groups of the Standing Committee that have been meeting. We had the Animals and Plants Committee also meeting. So there's a lot of work that is being done intersessionally. So amongst them is about reducing the risk of zoonotic diseases. We have, which has been a very important issue since the pandemic, of course, and what is the role of CITES in this? We are also going to be discussing cooperation with other multilateral environmental agreements and other organizations. And you can probably imagine that this is going to be very interesting as we have now taken on board the adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework of the CBD, which really applies to all MEAs, especially the biodiversity-related MEA. So how do we integrate this into the work of CITES? Some other areas that I think are very important to know about are the programs that we implement to be able to assist parties in effective implementation of the convention. To name a few that will be discussed at the meeting is the Compliance Assistance Program and the continuation of the CITES Tree Species Program. We have a bridging funding from the European Union, thanks to the European Union for that, to be able to continue providing assistance. We have now a large number of timber species that have been added to the CITES listings. These are very precious woods that are highly economical, part of the economy, and provide jobs for the countries, and they need assistance to be able to ensure that their timber trade in these species is sustainable and legal. Another interesting aspect of what we're going to discuss at the Standing Committee is on the Gender Action Plan for the first time ever after 50 years. As you know, this is CITES' 50th birthday. We're still celebrating it until next year. And it's for the first time that we have a Gender Action Plan. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. And also alongside that, in terms of major groups, Youth Global Network will be launched. So my colleagues will be discussing that. And of course, there's always the very important aspect of engagement of Indigenous people and local communities. They're going to talk a little bit about what has happened in those working group meetings that have taken place intersessionally. We also will have some very important subjects under science, like review of significant trade, captive breeding. These are all important issues. And again, while the Animals Committee Chair and the Flora Committee Chair always want to reduce the number because it's such an enormous amount of work, and Karen will be speaking a little bit about that. We have a very large number of species country combinations that are being looked at right now under review of significant trade. And finally, the one that I think that everybody is interested in and wants to hear more about, and maybe that's one of the reasons we have so many coming, is on these compliance cases that are going to be in front of the committee to decide on. And we have around 12 compliance cases that will be compliance cases that we will be discussed. And my colleague Juan Carlos will be discussing a little bit of that. There's also the missions that have been taken place to tiger farms in some specific areas that we were able to visit in these past few months. There's the work that's been going on under Totoaba and Paquita that my colleague Ben will be discussing as well with you. And finally, because I want to make sure that there's enough time for them to present, but also for you to ask questions if you have, I would like to send a call that we do not yet have a host for our next Conference of the Parties, which will take place in 2025. So I ask you to consider those parties of the convention of CITES who might wish to host one of the COPs of CITES in the near future. 2025 is coming up quite quickly, and we are hoping to be able to start the work of planning and organizing the next COP with the next host country. So if you can go back and talk to capitals and let them know that we are still awaiting a host for the next COP. That would be great. And hopefully we can have some offers coming in soon. So without more than that, I just wanted to say hello to everybody. Thanks. Again, thanks to my colleagues for all the hard work that they've done. And I'm sure you're going to find it very interesting, the briefing that they're going to give you today. So I will pass on now to my colleague, Sophie Flensburg, who's the chief of the governing bodies unit, and basically the person who's also ensuring the organization of the meeting and the logistics are all in place as well. And so she can give you a little bit of information about that. Sophie.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you, Secretary General. Good morning, everybody. Welcome here. Since you're mostly from the permanent missions based here in Geneva, I thought we should start with the practical information that you're probably also looking for. So can we have the next slide, please? Or am I supposed to do this? So here's the practical information. Most importantly, the meeting webpage, which is here, which will have the agenda. There will also be an annotated agenda, which will summarize all the agenda items and include the recommendations from each of the documents. So that's the shortcut to all of the documents. We may have 77 agenda items, but we have more than one document per agenda item. So there is a lot to get through, and hopefully this annotated agenda will help you. It will be available probably sometime next week, hopefully. We're still missing a few documents, but that is your go-to webpage for everything related to this meeting. The CICG, as already mentioned by the Secretary General, will be the venue. We have the entire CICG there. And even if you do have a UN badge, we invite you to register so that we have full overview of who is in the room, which is quite important to us. So parties can still register, preferably before the end of the month. NGOs, the deadline was 7th of October, a month before the meeting, so that's too late now. We have had to say no to a couple of NGOs that have come late, so unfortunately that's not possible. And also because, as the Secretary General mentioned, the CIGG we're reaching the limit of what the meeting room there can hold, the plenary can hold. So unfortunately we have to be quite strict about this. Media accreditation is still possible. There is a form available on the same webpage that needs to be submitted as soon as possible, and we will accredit any media representatives. As well, important for parties here is the credentials. They have to be submitted by email to the Secretariat or on site. So a scanned copy by email, preferably before the end of the month, or original you bring on site, or both, preferably. And this is, of course, mostly important for those parties that are members of the committee. They really do need to bring their credentials so that we have a properly functioning committee. Meeting hours, so unlike what the meeting hours in the Palais, we start at 9 o'clock. And our lunch break is 12 to 2, and we finish at 5. So just to note that those hours are a little bit different from what you're used to in the Palais. We have interpretation in English, French, and Spanish. I'll come back to this issue in a little while. And all the plenary sessions will be live streamed in the 3 languages on the CITES YouTube channel. So for those of you who are not able to be present, you can follow it live on YouTube, as we have this session today.
So she's going to do it for you.
Thanks. So without further ado, let's dive into some of the issues that will be discussed. And we have made a selection that we thought were more interesting for you. So we won't go through all 77 agenda items just because we only have 2 hours and we don't want to have a sort of a pre-meeting here. We just wanted to brief you on a few of those items we thought were more interesting for you. And I'm speaking to the first one, which is agenda item 16 on the CITES strategic vision. As was already mentioned, the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted in December 2022, which was just after our meeting of the Conference of the Parties. So we have to now take this into consideration in our processes and see how they contribute to the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework and how we can monitor this. And so the Secretariat has prepared a mapping where we link our strategic vision 2021 to 2030 with the Sustainable Development Goals and the goals in the GBF. And then we propose some minor amendments to one of our resolutions, which has this, which refers back to the Global Biodiversity Framework. And we also propose some changes to the reporting framework. So when you report under CITES on your implementation, you also can use indicators from the GBF and the SDG. And we made that mapping very clear. So it's very clear what will be irrelevant for all three frameworks, so that parties do not have to collect the same data for the same frameworks, but can actually use the data they have collected under one in their report to the other. So we made that very clear in our new implementation report guidelines that will also be discussed at the meeting. And the second issue in this particular document will be a possible indicator for the objective 1.4 of the CITES strategic vision, which reads as follows: the appendices correctly reflect the conservation status and needs of a species. And we have come up with a suggestion for a new indicator that we will invite the standing committee to consider. All the other objectives and indicators have already been agreed by the Conference of the Parties in Panama last year, but there was this one that was still outstanding, and therefore we have made a proposal for this. So these three things will be discussed under this agenda item: mapping and an amendment to the convention, to the resolution on cooperation of CITES with other biodiversity-related conventions to ensure that there is a link to the GBF, the indicator, and then, as I mentioned, the indicator for Objective 1.4. And then, as I mentioned, there will also be this implementation framework report that we will come back to under another agenda item. So those are the things I wanted to mention under the strategic vision. And we move on to cooperation, which is, of course, very closely linked. And here we report on mainly two things: the development of a partnership strategy for CITES parties, CITES Secretariat, and CITES standing permanent committees. And of course, as a small convention, but a convention that sits very strategically at the intersection between trade, environment, conservation, and development, we have a huge number of partners that we work with. Of course, our 184 parties are at the core of this, but around there we have other UN organizations such as UNODC, of course UNEP, as well as others. We have other international organizations. We have a number of non-governmental organizations that we work with, and then we also have private sector organizations that are relevant for our work. And the Conference of the Parties decided that we need a strategy to be more strategic about how we go about selecting partners and entering into partnerships, and also to identify any gaps where we should sort of move into areas where we have no current partnerships. So the Secretariat will report on progress on developing this strategy, and invite the Standing Committee to take note of this and provide any ideas for this. So that's the first item for under this cooperation agenda item. And the second one is the Secretariat is reporting on some opportunities for highlighting the achievement of CITES and advancing on synergies. So there is, first and foremost, there is the United Nations Environment Assembly in February, where there will be an agenda item related to MEAs, which is the first time that there's going to be a formal agenda item on MEAs. And the Secretariat will encourage parties to coordinate their participation and make sure that their UNEP delegates are fully briefed on CITES for this agenda item in February next year. And then in January, there is the Bern 3 conference of synergies, which has just been confirmed after I prepared this slide. It's just been confirmed last week that there will be a conference on synergies. And CITES has been invited to nominate 5 participants from its standing committee to take part in this conference in Bern to further discuss synergies and how multilateral environmental agreements can contribute to this implementation of the global biodiversity framework in a coordinated manner. So those two things will be discussed under this agenda item. And then the last one I wanted to just briefly discuss is agenda item 12 on emerging operational matters, which is following the COVID-19 pandemic. We have a need to consider the approach to how we make sure that work progresses even if we can't meet and hold our meetings as foreseen. And so the Secretariat has come up with 2 guiding principles for the best course of action if work will be interrupted by exceptional circumstances, as we saw by the COVID-19 pandemic. And these 2 guiding principles are the following. In-person meetings will be the default option always for all meetings of the CITES Permanent Committee. So, and these are the Standing Committee and the Animals and Plants Committees, as were mentioned. So we will always aim to have meetings in person, and that's a principle that we wanted to establish. And we would only go for hybrid or online meetings if a quorum would not be possible because of such exceptional circumstances, whether these were global or local. And therefore, these are the 2 main principles. And then we suggest how to go about implementing these principles. And the first one is quite simple, that if a meeting cannot take place as originally planned, it must take place within 6 months of the original date. And a decision on this must be made within 2 months. And otherwise, a meeting will take place online. If it cannot be held physically within 6 months, it must be held online. We must advance our work, and we do not want to lose too much time discussing how to advance the work. So we've agreed on these. We have proposed these principles to the Standing Committee. They were already discussed by the Animals and Plants Committee, who seem to be in agreement. So these are the ways we propose to move forward, and some amendments to the resolution on standing committees will also be proposed to codify these principles. I just wanted to make one more comment on an issue that is related to the language strategy of the convention. There's been some, since our COP in Geneva in 2019, some movement towards expanding our official languages from English, French, and Spanish to the other 3 official languages. And therefore, the Secretariat has been looking for funding to translate the about 100 resolutions we have into these 3 additional languages. And Switzerland has generously offered funding for this. So this is in the making. We'll be ready before the next COP. We'll have all our resolutions in the 6 languages. We're also looking for funding to have interpretation in the 6 languages at our next meeting of the Conference of the Parties, where we don't have that funding yet. And as the Secretary General was mentioning, we don't even have a host yet. So let's focus on a host first. And then once we have a host, maybe we can look for funding for interpretation in the 6 UN languages. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Discussing, well, firstly, knowing the logistics of how this is all going to work in November at the CICG, but very importantly, all that has to do with cooperation, and very importantly, how we're going to have this partnership strategy and see where maybe there could be some gaps, but also how to enhance the partnerships that we have already. We always talk about trying to make sure when we talk about synergies and partnerships that 1 + 1 should add up to more than 2. And that's what we're trying to do in the work, given the scarce resources and the fact that we don't want to have, we should not be duplicating work. We should be cooperating and complementing each other. So this is what we're looking towards. Thanks very much for that, and for the hard work of your team dealing with all of the documents, translation. I know it has been arduous, and I congratulate you for how far you've come along during this difficult time. So now we move on to the Chief of Outreach and Projects Unit, Ms. Haruko Kuso, and as I said, discussing a little bit about some innovative things like the Gender Action Plan and the Global Youth Network, but also something very important that a lot of you probably will want to hear about, which is this African Elephant Dialogue that was decided at the COP that would take place during this intersessional period. So I'm sure everybody's looking forward to what Haruko will be presenting on. Haruko.
Thank you, Secretary General. As it always has been with the convention, this standing committee meeting has several agenda items relating to elephants across various areas of science, policy, compliance, and law enforcement issues. And I'd like to highlight, give you a quick highlight on some of them. First of all, agenda item 63.1 is one of our regular reports on the implementation of Resolution Conf 1010 on trade in elephant specimens, and it consists of 5 sections that covers poaching and seizure trend analyses, implementation of priority recommendations from the review of the CITES program, conservation status of elephants, report from UNEP on the African Elephant Action Plan and the African Elephant Fund, and closure of domestic ivory markets. The report underlines that the poaching seems to continue showing a downward trend in most subregions, some challenges in data collection that have been pointed out in some subregions as well. The data also seems to suggest that there is an increasing evidence of elephant deaths from drought and human-elephant conflict in subregions, which requires further and closer observation in the future. There's also another agenda item on the CITES sustainability, and this document highlights the financial and operational challenges that and CITES programs are facing at the moment, and the need to refocus its priorities, review its program, and revitalize both of the programs into the near future. Agenda item 55 is a document that has been submitted by Botswana on dialogue meeting for African elephant range states. Botswana requests the standing committee to call for an official CITES dialogue meeting in implementation of decision 19.167, and also to review the draft terms of reference accordingly. Botswana has also offered to host the meeting and expresses the interest to discuss other issues of African elephant conservation on the occasion of the dialogue meeting for the African elephant range states. Agenda item 74, the African elephant taxonomy and nomenclature, deals with the recent discussion on the distinction of African elephants into 2 separate species and the potential impact of recognizing this distinction in the implementation of the convention. Moving to capacity building, there are 2 agenda items now on the standing committee. First, agenda item 23.1 reports on the implementation of the new resolution on capacity building. And this summarizes the Secretariat's work on capacity building efforts since COP19 to today. Agenda item 23.3 is an update and plans on the continued development of a CITES capacity building framework, which is timely now as it has an opportunity to align itself with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. CITES parties have started to turn their focus on stakeholder engagement in the recent years. There are 2 agenda items that are introducing some new developments in this area. First, agenda item 26 on Gender Action Plan. This reports on the implementation and the way forward of the new resolution on gender, international trade, and wild fauna and flora, which was adopted at COP19 last year. The Standing Committee is requested to provide feedback on the draft outline of the CITES Gender Action Plan that is attached to this document. The document also summarizes Secretariat's ongoing efforts to collect inputs, information, and case studies from parties and other stakeholders in order to better inform the development of the CITES Gender Action Plan in the future. Agenda items 27 deals with the CITES Youth Global Network. This is a document submitted by Singapore in collaboration with the Secretariat, and it addresses the implementation of Resolution Conf 17.5 on youth engagement. The document contains a proposal to establish a CITES global youth network, revitalizing past efforts, and it invites youth representatives from around the world to be acting as founding members to this network. Singapore, furthermore, offers to host its first CITES Youth Leadership Program and the first Global Youth Summit in Singapore in March next year, and it calls upon parties to support its efforts. And I think with that, I'd like to hand over to the Secretary General. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Haruko, for expanding on some of the things that we were talking about, like the Gender Action Plan and the Youth Network, but also the very important issue that always interests people to come, the participants to come to the meetings, which is about elephants, the discussions about elephants at the meeting. And this time we were going to have this interesting aspect of the nomenclature, which sounds for a lot of people, nomenclature is not that interesting, but in this case, now that they're dividing, that these two species have been recognized of African elephants, and in the paper, it's very clear that it could have a lot of impact on some of the decisions and resolutions that already are there. And so this decision will be taken by the Standing Committee on what it will mean on the impact on CITES. So it will be an interesting discussion on nomenclature. Now I'll hand over to Juan Carlos Vasquez, who is the chief of the legal unit, and going to talk a little bit about these compliance matters that we had discussed, and very importantly for the convention, the engagement of Indigenous people and local communities. Juan Carlos.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. And I would like to introduce also my colleagues working in the unit. So I'm working with Thomas Deloyle. Please, Thomas, and Liu Yuan. Thomas is dealing with the national legislation, and Liu Yuan with the socioeconomic aspects. And we have another colleague that is not here with us doing the annual reports. So the legal unit will brief you on compliance matters, and I would like to invite you to have a copy of the text of the convention. Article 13 is important. Many of these cases are based on that article. I will also invite you to have a look at the resolution 18.2. The Annex 1 is the one that contains the terms of reference for the Standing Committee. And you will see that on the functions, the first one is to undertake all the tasks directed by the COP, including those tasks related to the handling of general and specific compliance matters. So this is a kind of compliance committee as well. And you will see in that resolution also the composition of the Standing Committee. The Standing Committee has 16 members from 6 geographical regions, plus the depositary government and the previous host country, Panama. So 80 members in total, 16 voting, and in case of tie, the depositary government will break that tie. So this is also a committee that can make decisions by voting in case of non-consensus. So have a look at the rules of procedure as well. I think that is important for you. So we are going to discuss briefly some of the compliance cases. The Secretary General mentioned 12 cases, so the pandemic looks far now. We are accelerated after the pandemic and trying to catch up on all the commitments that you have adopted at the different COPs and the obligations under the treaty. We are going to discuss national laws, annual reporting, a mega timber case concerning 16 states from West Africa, trading in one tree that is called Pterocarpus erinaceus. We are going to talk about jaguars, and we'll close with other legal matters such as harvesting and trading from the areas beyond national jurisdiction or trade from the high seas, the verification of legality, and we are also going to refer briefly to annotations. And finally, I will make a couple of short comments on an important and complex discussion on the amendments to the rules of procedure for the COP. So turning to the compliance matter, I will invite your attention to the next slide. Yeah, no, that's that one. Sorry. And these are all the items are under section 33 of the agenda. I would like to remind another important resolution that will be useful for all of you, which is resolution 14.3, that is the one containing all the principles and procedures for the handling compliance matters in CITES. And I would like to highlight the approach that is supportive and non-adversarial in the CITES context. And the idea is to assist and help parties facing compliance difficulties to meet those commitments. So it is a kind of solidarity approach. It's not a punitive approach. We have a general document on compliance that contain general information on compliance and are reporting on the cases concerning Vietnam, on timber, and the UK on breeding captivity species that are listed in Appendix 1, that is the appendix that contains more or less 900 species of animals, mainly animals and some plants, and that is the most restrictive appendix. So for that trade, normally the conference of the party have agreed that party has to register, and we are verifying that in the UK. Then we have separate documents for Guinea, and my colleague Sophie Flandre is just coming back from Guinea. I don't know if she wants to say something on this case, but we have also Lao PDR, Nigeria, and Democratic Republic of Congo. These are updates. These cases were brought before to the committee. DRC was the first one in 7 years ago, so we would like to see some of these cases being seen an end near closing the case, but we are not ready for this committee, as you will see in the reports. Then we are bringing new cases identified in Standing Committee 74 in Lyon last year. And these cases concern Bangladesh, mainly for trading birds. And there is an increase that concerns us a lot on illegal trading birds, parrots. Cameroon, mainly on timber trade, a species called Pericopsis elata. Several timber species were listed in Panama, by the way, and some rules enter into force in February this year, so we may mention that as well. We have a case concerning trade in Asian elephants from Lao PDR to China. We have a case concerning Ecuador on sharks and has some links with Peru. They have a lot of bilateral trade. And the case of the European Union, so on the captive breeding. I will ask who is the president of the European Union during this semester. Perhaps we can discuss bilaterally, because that will be also an important case that concerns the 27 countries. But we have 2 visits to Spain and Germany, and these are the illustrations that will explain the case. Then on these cases, the Standing Committee is invited to adopt, consider if there is an issue with the compliance matters brought to their attention, and adopt if there are merits compliance measures. And there is in paragraph 29 of this resolution 14.3, you have a menu of measures, and in paragraph 13 you have the golden measure of CITES, which is a trade suspension. So some countries may face this discussion of trade suspension. So you are invited to analyze these documents. And I must say I apologize because some of these documents are delayed, were late. So sorry for that. As you see, we are only 3 working on all this, and it's a lot of work. So we beg your indulgence with this and apologize for the delay. Then next, moving to the national laws and annual reporting, you will see CITES has a very unique process. I think it's a good model for MEAs that now are starting to consider that. We assess the legislation of all the 184 parties according to 4 criteria, and we rank these legislations in 3 categories. Category 1 is the best one, category 3 is the less satisfactory, and you will see in that document that was prepared by Thomas the status now of the different parties that are in category 1, 2, and 3. We are making a lot of progress, so a majority of parties in category 1 now, but we still some room for improvement in our parties. So we are also bringing recommendations that concern Comoros, Congo, Dominica, Ecuador, Libya, Mongolia, and Sierra Leone. And we are also suggesting formal warnings for Azerbaijan, Belarus, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kenya, Kyrgyzstan, Lebanon, and North Macedonia. This is on national laws. On national reports, there is also an obligation for parties to submit an annual report with all the trade they have authorized during the past year. They have until October of the following year to report. If a party doesn't submit report for 3 consecutive years, there is an automatic trade suspension. So we are updating the committee on the status now, and you will see in the presentation the countries that are delayed. And we invite you to send this message to capitals that Angola, Antigua, Australia, Salam, Egypt, Equatorial Guinea, Fiji, the Gambia, Georgia, Guinea, Maldives, Myanmar, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Sierra Leone, Solomon Islands, and Togo are falling into that category. If they don't submit their annual reports within 60 days after the standing committee, they will be suspended for commercial trade. And this it concerns all trade transactions in CITES that are not only on live animals or live plants, it's all the products and derivatives of 40,000 species, which is a lot of products and millions of transactions. So this is a very heavy measure that we try to explain in the generic document on compliance. We are suggesting some interpretation of this. Next. So we would like just to that's the next. Yeah, we are bringing, as I mentioned, a mega compliance case on 16 countries that are range states to a species called Pterocarpus erinaceus. And in that document, you will see the status of all the documents, different progress made. CITES is very simple and complex at the same time because we just verify legality and sustainability. And to verify sustainability, we do something that we call the non-determinant findings. And to verify legality, parties have to do something we call legal acquisition findings. And this is what we are checking for the 16 countries to see if they have these 2 requirements in place. Some in bold you will see are suspended, don't have the requirements, and the others have different recommendations. And this is linked to our process on the review of significant trade, which is the scientific process handled by the scientific committees, in this case, the plants committee. So we are bringing to the committee the latest information on this case. And we have also a timber case involving Madagascar, which is a long-standing case, and is mainly referring to the stock that they have of this species of Diospyrosis pp and Alberghes pp since many years. Next, just to change a little bit, we would like to welcome the new members of the Standing Committee. Brazil will be a new member for from Central South America and the Caribbean, which is one of the 6 regions. And we just organized a meeting in Cuiabá in the Pantanal for all the range states. Just to change from elephants that are normally the iconic species in CITES. So we're bringing jaguars this time to the table, and they have several recommendations on a monitoring system, on a platform for a continental action plan and a platform of cooperation between the range states. And there is a working group on jaguars also chaired by Brazil that has the mandate to assess the merits of adopting a resolution on jaguars in CITES. And just keep in mind, we have also a bigger discussion on big cats and also resolutions on big cats. So the discussion will be around that, if we need to have resolutions for each species or we need to cluster the efforts better. Next. On our legal matters, something very important now that we are listing so many marine species, mostly sharks, is to understand what do we mean by harvesting from the high seas, basically. And in CITES, we have a resolution on that. And the document that we are bringing to a standing committee contains questions that we think are important to standardize interpretation of this practice, because we are seeing a low level of permitting and reporting on that trade. Something wrong is happening there. So we think that this may need more assistance. We are working a lot with FAO, building capacity, but the document brings some elements that we would like the committee to discuss and see if these are the responses that may be used as a standard response to the different questions from customs, transit countries, importing countries, exporting countries, etc. And we have a document also on the verification of legality. As I mentioned, we are working with FAO on developing tools, including a project called CITES Lex, to have a repository of all the laws that refers to CITES matters as a tool for the parties to facilitate the making of legal acquisition findings. And the standing committee is invited to take a look at the rapid guide that was developed and refined at the last COP to see if this is working well or needs some changes. Next, other legal matters concern the review of annotations in CITES. CITES, as explained before by the Secretary General and my colleagues, is a hybrid of environmental law, commercial law, customs law. So in these conventions, the small letters that we call annotations are very important. And this is where you place a lot of the negotiations, for instance, on elephants. So there is a proposal to create an informal review mechanism for existing and proposed annotations, and we have a consultant that is working on that. We have an information system for trading trees as well, to see, because normally annotations for trees refer mainly to raw materials, so to the logs and the plywoods, but we would like to know if these are the right products to annotate, or if we need to go beyond that to furniture or other things, noting that one of the annotations that we had in the past include all musical instruments made from this timber. So that created a lot of work and challenges for the musical industry. They are now one of the key stakeholders participating in some of our meetings. Finally, next, on the socioeconomics, we would like to thank Peru for hosting the meetings of the working groups on the engagement of indigenous people and local communities, and the working group on livelihoods that is chaired by Peru. We had a great meeting in Cusco, in Yucay, and with the participation of indigenous communities from several countries, including New Zealand. The altitude was a bit challenging for some people, but we have big discussions, and you will see the conclusions of the two working groups and the progress that they have made, and the recommendations that they are presenting to the standing committee, together with a document we also prepare with the experiences and lessons learned from parties in the engagement of IPLCs. So we have 3 documents there. And finally, to close, one document that is not there in the presentation, but that is an important and complex discussion, is discussion on the amendment of the rules of procedure for the COP. As you know, the COP update the listing of species, and last time they vote more than 40 times. They vote a lot in CITES. So the rules of procedure play a central role in your debates, and there are discussions to amend the rules on how, from where to start, or how to cluster proposals that contain similar content and refer to same species. And this is reported to the committee. There is a working group chaired by the United States, who are as chair of the standing committee, and they are reporting on the progress made. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos, for that very interesting overview that you have done in a few minutes something that's quite complex and large. And I think what I would like to emphasize here is this idea of compliance, which is very important under the convention. If we were trying to control overexploitation and avoid overexploitation, which is really one of the largest threats to wildlife, we need to ensure that all the parties are complying with the convention and effectively implementing the convention. And one of the ways in which we do this is through these procedures that we have under CITES. But I think it's very important, what Juan Carlos, and want to emphasize it as well, is that as much as possible, we are here, the Secretariat is here, we are always trying to assist the parties in being able to overcome those challenges that they are finding in implementing the convention. And the two very important aspects of the convention that are necessary to be able to ensure that this regulatory mechanism works are having these two foundation documents, which are the non-detriment findings for sustainability and care. And hopefully it's not necessarily on the agenda, but it would be good if you say a few words about what's happening there under NDF and under the legal acquisition findings, which is the other document related to legality and traceability. And here we are trying to find our ways the best to be able to support the parties to carry out, to do this work that needs to be done, which we know is complex and hard and requires a lot of technical know-how and working with science and working with the legal aspects. So really underlining how the Secretariat tries to help the parties to be able to comply with the convention and ensure that there's no overexploitation, because at the end of the day, the whole point is to be able, it's not about not using the resources, it's about using them sustainably and under the regulatory mechanism so that those resources can exist for future generations, but also can exist for supporting the economy and supporting jobs when those are economically important. So it's really to be able to ensure that those resources continue to be available for the economy, for the jobs, and also for future generations to enjoy this wildlife. Now, we're going to look at the other side of the coin of compliance, which is enforcement. And on that, I pass the floor to my colleague, Ben-Janse van Rensburg, who's going to talk to you about enforcement matters, what I brought up about the issue of Totoaba and Vaquita, and also the very important partnership that we have called IQUIC with other organizations. And again, talking about synergies and complementarities, I always say, what better partner to have than a convention where those parties are taking decisions that are legally binding, and then work with those organizations that are implementing and be able to absorb what those decisions are, understanding what the needs of the parties are, and assisting those parties, which are all the same as the member states that belong to these organizations. So Ben will talk a little bit about that. Ben.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, and also from my side, good morning to all of you and welcome here. And a lot of agenda items that will be discussed at SC77 will have links to enforcement and illegal trade, so it will be a lot of discussion on these issues. But I would like to start with the document on enforcement matters that was prepared for the meeting, document 39.1. And this document actually addresses a wide variety of issues. Firstly, the issue of corruption, and as highlighted in the document, corruption continues to pose a challenge in the context of addressing wildlife crime. But as also highlighted in the document, it is encouraging to see that parties seem to increasingly take strict action where corrupt practices are detected, and some examples of this action are provided in the document. Further, there's also information that's relevant to this issue that came to the attention of the Secretariat regarding Cambodia and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and this is highlighted in the document. Another issue that are addressed in the document is the issue of illicit financial flows from wildlife crime. And as noted in the document, there continues to be room for improvement regarding the integration of financial crime investigations into wildlife crime investigations. And ladies and gentlemen, this is important not only to ensure that the criminals do not benefit from the proceeds of their crimes, but also to facilitate the shift in focus from the lowest level of the trafficking chain, the poachers, to those at the top level managing and organizing the trafficking at international level. In the document, there's also a number of activities highlighted that were conducted since COP19 to support work related to addressing illicit financial flows from wildlife crime. Then the document also provides information on the CITES illegal trade database, and as shown in the document, up to August 2023, over 115,000 seizure records that were reported by our parties were recorded in the CITES illegal trade database. And it's increasingly evident what value this database is having as more and more data are recorded in it. And data from the database have been drawn upon, for example, to inform the content of various of the documents that were prepared for the 77th meeting of the Standing Committee. It will inform the third World Wildlife Crime Report, which UNODC is currently developing, and we're working closely with them on that. And the CITES illegal trade database data dissemination platform is also being finalized, which will make the data in the database directly accessible to all our parties. And in that way, it can become a powerful tool that parties can analyze and use to see what's happening and to inform their law enforcement responses and direct their resources. What is also important and highlighted in the document is that the CITES illegal trade database is currently subject to external funding. And the document raised the issue of importance that sustainable funding be secured to maintain this database, because if external funding runs out and data recording can't happen for a certain period of time, it can lead to significant data gaps and really diminish the value that this database can have for our parties. Then the document also provides information on the directory of laboratories that conduct wildlife forensic testing. Now, since COP19, the Forest Research Institute of Malaysia were included in the directory, and at present there are 13 laboratories in the directory. Of course, these laboratories all meet the highest standards, and we encourage our parties to draw upon their services when needed to make sure we also mobilize forensic technology against wildlife crime. Now, in terms of recommendations, the Standing Committee will consider recommendations regarding addressing illicit financial flows, regarding the directory of laboratories, and regarding the CITES illegal trade database. Then I move on to the next item, which is Totoaba. And you heard from the Secretary General, Totoaba remains a significant issue. And there were two documents submitted for this agenda item, document 33.13.1, which was submitted by Mexico as the chair of the Trilateral Contact Group between Mexico, China, and the USA. And this document provides an update on progress with finalizing the terms of reference for the contact group to operationalize it. Then there's document 33.13.2, which is a document that was prepared by the Secretariat. And in this document, reporting is provided on the implementation of the decisions and recommendations on Totoaba that were adopted at COP19 and also agreed at SC75, the 75th meeting of the Standing Committee. The document highlights reporting that were received from parties affected by Totoaba trafficking on the activities they have conducted to address this. And as you likely know, Mexico was also requested at the 75th meeting of the Standing Committee to develop and implement a compliance action plan on Totoaba. And the document highlights the activities conducted in that regard and the progress made by Mexico with implementation of its compliance action plan. It shows that good progress has been made, but also that continued efforts remains essential. Now, the illegal fishing of Totoaba and the threat it poses to the vaquita, as I mentioned, remains a matter of great concern, and parties of origin, transit and destination must therefore take action to scale up their collaborative efforts. And the Secretariat therefore also highlights in the document the importance of collaboration between, in particular, the three parties most affected, China, Mexico, and the United States of America, to work together on fighting this crime and to urgently finalize the terms of reference to establish the trilateral contact group and operationalize it. The Secretariat also provided an update on progress with the study on vaquita and totoaba that's being undertaken in accordance with the COP decision. In terms of recommendations, the Standing Committee will consider recommendations related to the implementation of the Compliance Action Plan by Mexico, technical missions to China and the United States of America, the Trilateral Contact Group, and others. Then, as you already heard from Juan Carlos, big cats will be a significant matter of discussion at the Standing Committee, and there are numerous documents on big cats that will be discussed at this meeting. The first one is document 39.3 on the CITES Big Cats Task Force. In this document, the Secretariat reports on the outcomes of the Big Cat Task Force meeting held in Entebbe in Uganda in April 2023. There was a meeting outcome document which outlines the measures and activities to be undertaken to address illegal trade affecting big cats, and this include measures and activities related to strengthening implementation and enforcement of the convention, strengthening regulation of facilities breeding big cats in captivity, reducing demand to combat illegal trade in big cat specimens, identification of these specimens, and strengthening regional and international collaboration. And in terms of recommendations, the Standing Committee will consider, as you heard, also from Juan Carlos, a proposal of a resolution on illegal trade in big cats, and will also consider a recommendation to encourage all parties to implement the outcomes of this task force meeting. Then there's document 41.1 on Asian big cats. And in this document, the Secretariat report on a broad range of matters related to Asian big cats, which include their conservation status and measures taken by parties to protect them, enforcement measures and activities, reduction of demand, wildlife forensics related to Asian big cat specimens, and other matters. And based on this information provided, the Standing Committee will consider a number of recommendations on Asian big cats. Then we move on to the next document, which is document 41.2, Asian big cats in captivity. And in accordance with a decision from COP19, the Secretariat undertook missions to parties identified in whose territories there are facilities that may be of concern keeping Asian big cats in captivity. The Secretariat in the document report on the results and findings of the missions it conducted to the Czech Republic, Laos PDR, South Africa, Thailand, and Vietnam. And in terms of recommendations, the Standing Committee will consider recommendations directed to all parties in whose territories there are facilities keeping big cats, Asian big cats in captivity, as well as specific recommendations directed to the parties visited during the missions. Then I move on to rhinoceroses, document 45. Again, in this document, the Secretariat report on a broad range of matters related to the resolution on rhinos and the decisions on rhino adopted at COP19. The document focuses on Botswana, China, Malaysia, Mozambique, Qatar, South Africa, the United Arab Emirates, and Vietnam as the parties most affected by illegal trade in rhino horn. And the Secretariat also addressed emerging issues in the document related to Angola and Namibia. Further, the 2023 Chitwan Declaration for Asian Rhino Conservation, agreed by the 5 Asian rhino range states, and the Directory of Illegal Trade in Rhinoceros horn focal points are addressed in the documents. And in terms of recommendations, the Standing Committee will consider recommendations related to the parties mentioned, as well as on other matters. The last document I will speak about is document 39.2 on the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime, or ICWIC as it's known for short, and you heard already the Secretary General speaking about that. ICWIC, of course, the collaborative effort between 5 intergovernmental organizations, the CITES Secretariat, Interpol, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the World Bank and the World Customs Organization, through which support is provided to parties. The ICWIC Consortium continued to play a critical role regarding engaging and working with parties globally to combat wildlife crime. And in the document, the Secretariat reports on the activities conducted under the auspices of ICWIC. And the document also highlights the ICWIC Vision 2030, which will provide a roadmap for the activities of ICWIC over the next decade. In terms of recommendations, the Standing Committee will consider recommendations that relates to the efforts of parties to combat wildlife crime, the engagement in ICWIC activities, the support provided by ICWIC, as well as the use of revised and updated ICWIC tools. The recommendations also address the ICWIC strategic program, which is now drawing to a close and which will be superseded by the ICWIC Vision 2030. And then, ladies and gentlemen, there's several other documents related to enforcement, wildlife crime enforcement support in West and Central Africa, marine turtles, Tibetan antelope, and others. But unfortunately, time won't allow us to go into those. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ben, and for the heavy lifting also from all of the different units, but especially with this one, we had, for example, with Totoaba, hundreds and hundreds of pages that had to be reviewed in Spanish, and you don't speak Spanish, and having to do a lot of work to be able to get to a conclusion where I think the Secretariat has been able to say that Mexico has really come a long way in the implementation of this compliance action plan. Let's see what the Standing Committee thinks about it, but I think that this compliance action plan is quite a good instrument and tool of the convention, because you can put milestones and really see how you progress in the recommendations that are given by the Standing Committee and the COP. So we are looking forward to that discussion. I think another aspect that's very important always with enforcement is about how we're working with corruption and other, following the money, the financial aspects of it, because we know that these are led by normally international criminal organizations working behind them. And this is really the only way that we're going to be able to stop the illegal trade, is by heading towards the top and making sure that there is no incentive for them to participate in this kind of illegal activity, because the seizures are growing, and what is the point in investing in something like this if we know that if you know that you're going to get caught? So this is the work that continues under this. And for some other species, for example, that we hear with rhino, for example, we had been having a very good, and in some cases still continues, a very positive trend, but we have seen now that there have been some changes, and we're going to pay attention to those changes in rhino horn trade and some issues with poaching that have increased in some countries. So that's what we're bringing to the attention of the Standing Committee. And I should mention then also in terms of elephants, we need to be on top of these trends that are happening with the poaching. We have seen that a lot of poaching has decreased in most of the areas through the work that we do under Mike, and most of the areas of Africa. But then we see that there's other trends developing, like human conflict, human wildlife conflict, the droughts, the situation. Here we talk about how there's this relation between different types of environmental crises that are going on, such as climate change, and affecting also the wildlife. And I think probably with rhinos, we see the same situation, that they're also affected by climate. So these are all important issues that the Standing Committee are going to discuss. And now, last but not least, science, which is underpinning the convention. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the zoonotic diseases, about the issue of review of significant trade, about captive breeding, and non-detriment finding. If you throw in a couple of words about that exciting work that's being done, Karen, and it's going to come to an apex in Nairobi in December. I would appreciate if you can speak a little bit about that. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Secretary General. And it's my pleasure to present to you today on behalf of the Chief of the Unit, who's on mission this week, and that's why I am presenting, but I'm the Scientific Support Officer for Fauna in the Science Unit, and I'm joined here by some colleagues as well. There are 6 of us in the unit. There's a Chief, there's 2 of us working on Fauna, myself and HJ, and 2 working on Flora, Isabella Martin, who are here, and we have a research assistant. So I'm hoping that if there are any follow-on questions that I'm not in a position to answer, that my colleagues might be able to assist. So thank you. So I would like to mention several important topics that are being led by the Science Unit that were previously discussed at the meetings of the Animals Committee or the Plants Committee held earlier this year, and that will be again discussed at SC77. So the first topic I would like to mention is CITES and forests, where the strategic importance of CITES in the conservation of forests and sustainable forest management will be discussed. And this builds on the collective knowledge, resources, mechanisms and networks of the existing global governance framework on forests. In document 21, the Secretariat reports on the progress it has made in preparing a CITES and forest compendium, COP19 to COP20. And this is basically cataloguing all of the resolutions and decisions that may be relevant for any new initiative on CITES and forests with a focus on tree species. Secretariat also reports on the preparations of a multidisciplinary study on CITES and forests, and this includes a draft terms of reference that has been developed with the Plants Committee. Secretariat also reports on the scope of new initiatives as agreed by the Plants Committee that will initially focus on CITES listed tree species, although eventually the scope could include all forest species of fauna and flora. And finally, it reports on its efforts to enhance and raise awareness of CITES contributions to global forest relevant mandates and forest policies and initiatives, including attending the 18th session of the United Forum on Forests, some bilateral engagements with the CPF, and a high-level meeting with FAO on CITES and forests. So at this meeting, the Standing Committee is invited to consider the progress made and to explore options aligned with the CITES strategic vision, which Sophie spoke to previously, to enhance the implementation of CITES with respect to CITES listed forest species and its contribution to global forest relevant mandates, and to raise awareness of the importance of investing in the conservation, sustainable management and legal trade of CITES listed forest species. So the next item I wanted to speak to was the role of CITES in reducing the risk of future zoonotic disease. There are 2 documents for the Standing Committee to consider. The first is a report from the Intersessional Working Group of the Standing Committee that was established just after COP19. And this working group is co-chaired by Israel and Singapore. And they are presenting their interim report on the work that has happened so far and the discussions that have taken place related to the establishment, or the possible establishment, I should say, of a CITES advisory body to provide guidance to parties. And in this document, the working group reports that the majority of the members did not see a need for this advisory body at this stage, but these discussions are still ongoing. The second document, which is document 17.2, is from the Secretariat and reports on responses received from parties to a notification to the parties about any measures that they have in place to prevent and mitigate the risk of pathogen spillover and transmission from wildlife trade and associated wildlife supply chains, including markets. It also reports on information relating to the activities implemented by the Secretariat of the CMS, or the Convention on Migratory Species, and also parties to CMS relating to this area of work, and inputs from other organizations and the United Nations Environment Programme. And finally, it also includes the draft Memorandum of Understanding with the World Organization for Animal Health and a draft working programme. So the Standing Committee is invited at this meeting to note the interim report of the working group, to review the report of the Secretariat and provide inputs into the draft MOU and also the draft programme of work. And once these 2 documents are agreed, then the MOU can be signed. And also then finally, the Standing Committee is invited to request this intersessional working group to consider the information provided by the parties in their responses to the notification, the information from the CMS Secretariat, organisations and UN Environment Programme that are found in the Secretariat's report, and to consider this during this next intersessional period. So next, please. So, as our Secretary-General has mentioned several times, an important item that will be discussed at this meeting is the review of significant trade. And this is a very important compliance process whereby the reported trade in Appendix 2 listed species is reviewed to identify species that may be subject to unsustainable levels of international trade. And also to identify remedial measures to ensure that the export of Appendix 2 listed species takes place at a level that will not be detrimental to the survival of the species. So this analysis of the trade is undertaken by the Animals and Plants Committees, and they are the ones who draft recommendations for the cases or the species country combinations where there are concerns about possible unsustainable levels of trade. And then it is the Standing Committee that reviews, the Secretariat reviews the implementation of these recommendations and reports to the Standing Committee, who make recommendations on further actions. So there are 3 documents for the Standing Committee to consider on review of significant trade. The first is an overview, which basically provides an update on the cases that are currently in the review, noting that we've had recent meetings of the Animals and Plants Committees where new cases were selected for inclusion. 21 cases were added at AC 32 and 20 cases were added at PC 26. So this gives a total of 118 species country combinations currently subject to review. And this is broken down into 79 fauna cases and 39 flora cases. The overview also provides details of our new RST database, or tracking and management system, which will be a great resource for parties who find themselves in the review process. So they will be able to keep track of where they are, what recommendations they face, what the deadlines are, and then it will help us all to correspond directly with the countries, and the Secretariat to correspond directly with the countries. So that's the overview, and then the 2, main documents that will need decisions from the Standing Committee are a document on the cases concerning the animals first, and then plants second. So it's documents on the implementation of the recommendations from the Animals Committee, the Plants Committee, an update when we have some new information available, noting that the last time these cases were discussed was at SC77. So where we have new information provided from the range states or where some deadlines have expired, these are the cases that are being considered at this meeting. You should note that 19 of these cases concern fauna. The countries in question are Indonesia, Guyana, Suriname, Grenada, Equatorial Guinea, Cameroon, DRC, Mali, Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia. And in the case of Flora, there are 15 cases for review. And the countries in question are Nicaragua, Panama, Congo, DRC, Cameroon, India, and the 8 countries that Juan Carlos mentioned previously in relation to the Article 13 process for Pterocarpus erinaceus. Also to note that 48 of these 118 species country combinations are currently subject to a Standing Committee recommendation to suspend trade. And I should point out that there is one recommendation for a new trade suspension concerning Mali. All of the other the recommendations, which have been done in consultation with the members of the Animals and Plants committees. All of the rest of them are either to retain or in 10 cases to remove them. So I think I would advise you to have a look at the list of the countries and the cases just to see if there are also some clarifications that your countries could provide that would assist the Standing Committee in its deliberations. So the Standing Committee will have to decide on the necessary action and make recommendations for these 34 cases that will be considered at this meeting. So the last one bar, of course, the NDF, which I will mention. is the review of trade in animal specimens reported as produced in captivity, so the captive breeding resolution. This is quite a similar process to the review of significant trade, but this time we look at the trade in Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 listed species, and we look at the source codes C, D, F, and R. So we're looking at animal species that are reported, that are non-wild, basically. So, and this is because a large portion of international trade now involves animals that are reported as captive bred. And the convention provides for special treatment of such specimens as defined by the parties. And the concerns that the parties have in relation to captive breeding can be incorrect application of source codes, the misuse of false declarations of source codes, and in particular, the legal origin of the parental stock. So while a non-detriment finding is not needed to export captive bred specimens, they must be able to demonstrate that the parental stock was sourced legally. So at the 74th meeting of the Standing Committee, 11 species country combinations were retained in the review process. So these are the only current cases. This document will look at the recommendations, how they have been, the Secretariat's assessment in consultation with the Animals Committee, how they have been implemented. And the Standing Committee will be invited to decide on appropriate actions and again make recommendations to the country or countries concerned. And in this case, there are recommendations to remove 8 of the combinations, to retain 3 of the combinations. So that's the end of my slides, but I did want to mention non-detriment findings. It is not on the agenda for the Standing Committee, but as we've heard several times today, this is a very important topic, and we would like to highlight some of the work that is being done. You'll note, of course, that it is not possible to issue an export permit without a non-detriment finding. But this has been a difficult topic because we have not had guidance on how to actually make a non-detriment finding until it took 40 years to have our first resolution, which was adopted at COP16. So it's widely recognised that this is a core component of CITES, so additional guidance is needed, and it's been more than 10 years since we had the last expert workshop to develop some guidance. So the Secretariat has convened a technical expert workshop that will take place from the 6th to the 10th of December in Nairobi. And the aim is to develop guidance for parties to assist them in making NDFs. Now, a lot of groundwork has gone into this already, and a huge volume of guidance, draft guidance, I should say, has been prepared that will be considered at this workshop. This guidance material has been developed in collaboration with parties and also with the Animals Committee, the Plants Committee and the Standing Committee and experts in the field. So the guidance that will be developed and coming out of this workshop, it will then need to be tested in the field. And one thing we will be looking for is for parties to volunteer to test this guidance, see how it applies in the field, and then provide some feedback. And another area that the workshop will look at is developing a feedback mechanism so that we will be able to learn from parties as they apply this guidance in the field. So this will be an iterative process where we continue to learn and develop guidance from seeing how parties can apply this and how useful it is. So we do hope that all parties will be involved in this process because I think it's a really important resource and tool for your benefit as well. So thank you, Secretary General. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Karen, and adding the bit on non-detriment finding, because I think many countries will be interested in participating in the meeting, but also later when it comes to the testing of this guidance, it will be very important to have those countries, especially for those species that have been recently listed on CITES, such as those dealing with marine species and timber, which are very difficult. I know sharks, for example, is a very big issue under CITES now in terms of developing this non-detriment finding. So again, trade cannot happen without having the non-detriment finding, without having the legal acquisition finding, but it has been a long time since since CITES came into being, and now that we're preparing the guidance, it has to be updated, and yes, it involves many countries understanding for the types of species that they're managing, how to carry out in the best way possible this non-detriment finding. I wanted to add, well, first of all, let me just say thank you to the team, to the entire team of the Secretariat, also sitting in the back for the very hard work that they've done to make sure that we have a successful event, a successful committee meeting. We are a small secretariat. It's a lot of heavy lifting from everyone, and I congratulate you on everything that has been done and working with the parties to make sure, as well as those in the Standing Committee and the Animals and Plants Committee that have to write their own documents. I should recognize also the parties who have to carry out the work of writing their own documents. Just to let you know that there will be side events during this meeting. We will have we will show the calendar on our website, and there's a total of 18 side events that will be carried out during the meeting, normally during the lunchtime or in the afternoon after the end of the meeting. So many of them very interesting, all of them very interesting. Some of them also more interesting, the CITES Secretariat is supporting a few of them, and we work with them. With many of these organizations who are going to be presenting, so I would ask you to participate as much as you can in that. And finally, I think my call to you is that when I clear these reports, one of the things that comes to me that I see often is the fact of lack of reporting from the parties on these annual reports, but also on when it comes to the review of significant trade, when it comes to how you're progressing, how you're implementing recommendations on the National Ivory Action Plans, on various reports that we need. I don't see that the parties are responding, and I think this is something, what we want to do is help you not be under these type of compliance measures. So please, those of you who are representing in the Standing Committee as members, please, when you see these lists of names that my colleagues have given you, go back to your members and talk to them and find out what are the reasons behind it. See if an oral report can be brought to the meeting, or a written report as well. It would be nice if you did it in time before the time when the documents are due, but at least to have a knowledge and prepare yourselves. Come with the information to give to the members at the meeting. And again, this will help for us to know, for those parties that need some assistance, we can provide that. The idea is to get you out of these compliance measures. Finally, we want to open the floor for some questions. We have half an hour for that. If there's anything from the parties who are here around the table, any questions that you may have, and we will try to answer them. Iran, please.
Thank you, Madam. First of all, I would like to express my profound gratitude to the Secretary for convening this insightful meeting, and also to the thoughtful, I should say, presentation that delivered in the meeting. As this is my first attendance to this to the CITES meeting. My question goes to as we are not the member of the Standing Committee, I would like to know the position of the contracting party who is not the member of the Standing Committee, that they would like to attend the Standing Committee meeting. What would be their situation? They can give comment, or I'm sure that they don't have vote, but I would like to know what would be their situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, because I think it is something that probably we have to explain better. Of course, there are members of the Standing Committee, but then we also have observer parties participating in the meeting. So you have to register the same as any other, as other parties. I think the deadline is 30th of October. Yeah. Maybe you can say a little bit more about that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a good question. The committee consists of 20 parties, 18 of which are regional representatives, and then we have the depositary government, Switzerland, and the former and future host of the COP are also members of the Standing Committee. Those are the ones that are responsible for making the decisions. Now, when it comes to the actual meeting, other parties are being heard. So basically, we have first the standing committee members will be asked, will be given the floor, then the parties will be given the floor, and then observers, to the extent that there is time available, will be invited to contribute to the discussion. So during the discussion, parties and members, parties, and observers are taking part in the discussion, but when it comes to making the decision, it is the committee that has to make the decision. Thank you. And as for the registration, we have a deadline that says 7 days in advance to register. Parties that are very late in nominating their delegation will not be rejected at the meeting. But for logistical purposes, it's important that we have the registration in advance. As I said before, the conference hall, the plenary room D, sorry, at CICG will be maxed out this time, so it's easier for us to plan if we know in advance that delegations will be present. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Anything else? Japan?
Thank you very much, Secretary General and colleagues. Good morning to all. We have a small question on logistics. As well as a standing committee member, we understand from the rules of procedures that up to 4 delegation members can be seated at the venue. So we would like to make sure if it will be the case for this study committee in CICD. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we will make every effort to make that possible. Possibly it will be 2 people with seats at the table and 2 people behind, depending a little bit on the number of persons in each delegation. So we'll make every effort to make sure that there is at least 4 seats for each party present. Thank you.
Indonesia, please.
Thank you, Madam SG, and good morning, colleagues. First of all, as Iran mentioned, we thank the Secretariat, Madam SG, and the team, and Diana and Jen for having this briefing today. It's very useful, especially since we are compliance issues, which are serious issues in our regard. We consider this organization is very serious because of, as it was mentioned, it is combination of WTO and conservation and maybe Security Council, right? So we would like to thank for the reminders on national reports, compliance reports, I think illegal reports and illegal traffic reports, and we will try to coordinate with our members in our region to remind them, and with Japan, of course, since he's next to me, so we could try to avoid suspensions, perhaps for our members. Thank you, Madam SG. Just a comment.
Thank you, Indonesian. Indeed, your work as members of the standing committee is really cut out for you. It's the best you can do is to communicate with all the members before the meeting, and get, especially for those who may not be present. We already know that some who are having some compliance cases will not be present personally at the meeting, so it would be good that they can inform then their standing committee members of what their position is, or give the explanations or an oral report through you and the other members. So really, that's great that you are aware of that job before the meeting starts. Thank you. Yes, Iran.
Small question. The meeting would be in hybrid format or would be in personal just?
It'll be just in person. This is one of the things that we decided that the parties and the standing committee has decided, but it will be streamed on YouTube. So those back home in capitals will be able to see the proceedings. The only ones that we don't stream are when they're working in working groups, but the plenaries are all streamed on YouTube, on the CITES channels. Maybe we give that information at some point. Thanks. Carlos, you have a question?
With the permission, Secretary General, no, just to go back to the question from Iran, the first one, parties subject to compliance procedures are more than welcome to attend. You are encouraged, and the meeting is open to observers. Observer parties play an important role, very active in the discussion, but also on the working groups in the debates that they have. And the NGOs are also allowed, and the representative of the private sector. So you are most than welcome. We are making an effort to bring some of the parties that are concerned by Article 13 processes. It's too late to request sponsorship, but we always try to have the parties concerned at the meeting. Nobody else is better placed to defend your position or yourself. Otherwise, we encourage you, if you are not able to attend, please pass the information to your regional rep. Talk to your regional reps to make sure that they have the information that they require to defend your case. Thank you.
Any other parties wishing to, representatives of missions wishing to take the floor? All right, I think then we conclude. Of course, we are always available for you to reach out to us if you have any other questions and need any help in terms of the logistics. But thank you so much. Did you want to say something? No, okay. Thanks. Well, you can always approach us later if you wish to have a meeting. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks again to the Geneva Environment Network and to the government of Switzerland for allowing us to have these opportunities to meet with you. And again, looking forward to seeing you all at the Standing Committee very soon. The clock is ticking. We are all feeling the pressure, and hopefully that we will be able to cover the agenda in the time that we have, because this is always a concern. We will have to do our best. And that's why sometimes we do bring to your attention that while we try to be as inclusive as possible, and the chair will try to be as inclusive as possible and take all the comments on board when they're requested for the floor, it's not always possible to give everybody the floor because of the problems that we have with time. So just so you're aware of that, but generally, standing committee members and parties should be able to speak. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank you, Diana.